So we've got two fabulous speakers to complete this keynote session to talk to us about the state of Landcare and the future of Landcare. The first is Kerry Colbung. She's the CEO of the Aboriginal Lands Trust. Kerry is a grounded and connected woman. Her strong cultural identity has been attributed to growing up on her mother country, which has reinforced her respect for culture and country. With a career spanning 30 years working with community and government organisations, Kerry has led highly successful Aboriginal initiatives. Amongst her achievements include an appointment as the inaugural chairperson of the Premier's South Australian Aboriginal Advisory Council, appointment to the South Australian Strategic Plan Update Leadership Group, and membership to the South Australian Community Board. In 2009, Kerry was awarded a Public Service Medal for her services to Indigenous people in South Australia, which recognised her ability to manage high-level, strategically complex and politically charged issues. I'm very much looking forward to hearing about Kerry's presentation. She doesn't have a PowerPoint, so we're going to be hearing from her, which I often think creates a lovely, intimate ambience and environment. So hearing from her speaking at the lectern, the focus of her presentation is on connection to country while maintaining the landscape and culture. Can we welcome Kerry, please?
Thank you, Leanne. In keeping with cultural protocol, I'd first like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this country, the First Peoples of the River Murray and Mallee region, and I'd like to thank Uncle Barney for his welcome to country last night and this morning, reinforcing the importance of the story of Aboriginal people and their connection to country. I want to also acknowledge that I was out here about a week and a half ago up at Gerard looking at the hay farm and meeting with the council there, and just the significance of the connection to country that the local Aboriginal people have up here, and to acknowledge that, you know, when we talk about country and we talk about the landscape, we talk about sacred ground when it went from an Aboriginal perspective. And just want to recognise that the ground that we stand on today and that we meet on today has been occupied by the ancestors and the descendants of the people of the River Murray and the Mallee region for many years. And those people have evolved with the river and the land. And I want to also acknowledge the fact that, you know, we've got a beautiful backdrop, the River Murray down there, which is very significant in terms of its spirituality and the connection of that story to the Aboriginal people of this region. The people of this region have changed that landscape as part of their connection to the story and the significance of the story and the creation of the river and how it blended into the landscape, and they changed with it. So, you know, we've heard some speakers this morning who are talking about the challenges that are facing the industry and facing the Landcare, the Landcare agenda, and the challenges are the constant changing environment that we continue to face every morning, and we greet it when we get up out of bed. And I want to acknowledge the importance of the people from the River Murray region who've evolved with that over many thousands of years and are still here today as a strong group. When we look around us here, I mean, I'm from the West Coast, so, you know, my area is desert and sea, and my father has got many family up here in the Riverland, and, you know, he talked about the river and the significance of the river in his days. And I had the opportunity to come up here and work over many years in a variety of jobs, and got to connect with the family and also the people up here, and to just embrace the environment. And just on a reflection of that, you know, it's not just the soil that we see, or the rocks or the minerals or the river. From an Aboriginal perspective, what we see is a whole environment that has sustained the people and their culture for many thousands of years. And to acknowledge that the river and the land is at the core of their spirituality. and their relationships. We've heard about the importance of the relationships and the networks that have been central to all the issues that have been important to the traditional owners today. Thank you very much to the Landcare Association of South Australia and Jerry and Glenn in particular for their persistence with the Aboriginal Land Trust and our participation here. We are going through a new phase of change at the moment. We have a new legislation that we are working through implementing. And one of the things in my very first conversations with Jerry and Glenn had identified the importance of the Landcare movement, and the strength of it is the people. It doesn't matter at the end of the day, we can take away the systems, the structures, the politicians, whatever else, but the people remain, and they remain connected to the land. And you know how grounding that was last night to have the welcome and to have the smoking ceremony, which automatically connects us. And that's something that I would encourage you to take away, the importance of really connecting, because that's about our identity as people, our strength, our well-being, and the way in which we continue to exist in the world today. As you can see, the global economy is just moving very fast and at a rapid pace that is sometimes quite often beyond our means. But at the end of the day, we always must ground ourselves, because that's what gives us the strength to cope with the changes that are over the horizon. I want to acknowledge the people that have been involved in the history of the Lands Trust. I want to talk about the Aboriginal Lands Trust and the history of it, because it was very important in the establishment of the Aboriginal land rights movement in South Australia and also Australia. And the role that the land management practitioners have played in our history over the many years since 1966. And they've been at the centre of the Aboriginal Lands Trust Land Management Program and have been very much engaged with communities and promoting the importance of the environment and looking after country. One of those people that have really led that work quite tirelessly has been John Chester, who was the General Manager of the Aboriginal Lands Trust and is now the Property Manager, and who has pretty much handed over the message stick to me as a younger person coming through and an Aboriginal woman to take over the reins, to start to lead the change, to continue to sustain our communities and our involvement in South Australia. But I also want to acknowledge those people who have been part of the partnership with us as well, the Landcare SA in particular, and all of the other stakeholders that continue to engage in our business, the NRM boards, and also those communities that we are involved with on a daily basis. And there are representatives in the room here today from Gerard, the Adelaide Mount Lofty, our guys from the ALOC team who work in the Adelaide Mount Lofty region, Point Pearce, the women from Nepabunna, from the Nantawarra Indigenous Protected Areas Program. But more importantly, as we move forward, I guess I want to take you back to a moment in time to experience the creation, to share with you the experience of the creation of the Aboriginal Lands Trust, so that you understand, get to share with us and understand the extent of the advocacy and the efforts and the petitioning and the lobbying and the perseverance that went on at the time that has led to the legacy that we've now got. And that was all achieved against the backdrop of extreme adversity that Aboriginal people were subjected to in the late 60s. So in 1965, in August, South Australian Aboriginal community sought the support of an Aboriginal deputation of representatives from the Federal Council of Aboriginal Advancement to come to South Australia to help to petition the members of the Legislative Council, who at the time was blocking the passing of the Aboriginal Lands Trust Bill in State Parliament. So some of those people that were involved included the late Mr Charlie Perkins, Mr Doug Nichols, who then became later on in life, our governor here in South Australia, Ms Kath Walker, and the South Australian delegates who included the late Mr Laurie Bray from Port Augusta, the late Mr Jerry Mason from Gerard, the late Mr Tim Hughes from Point Pearce, and the late Mr Garney Wilson, who then had played a leadership role in the Aboriginal Lands Trust. At that time, it was reported that the delegation took a plea to the Legislative Council in a most unusual way, and the protest was described as being unusual. They sought deputation to not delay the passing of the Aboriginal Lands Trust Bill, because the bill had stalled some 12 months, and the debate was around the issue of mineral rights. And there were other attitudinal issues as well. You know, they lobbied, they sought private interviews, they sat in the gallery in Parliament House, and they waited to talk to members of the Legislative Council and also the government of the day, which was the Labor government. And both at the time, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs was Don Dunstan, who took the time to go and talk to the delegation to reassure them that they were being supported in terms of the process to continue to push through the debate around the bill in Parliament. However, what they did notice was one of the politicians of the Legislative Council who was sitting in the room doing a crossword at the time, and then later gave the group a hearing and assured the group that they would allow the passing of the passage of the bill with certain qualifications, but it was quite evasive because there were more things that needed to be debated. Anyway, so continuing on from that, 12 months, like I said, on the 13th of July 1966, in his second reading speech, the Honourable Don Dunstan, our flamboyant minister as he was known at the time, was the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, and the Attorney-General had moved to introduce the bill into Parliament for an act to establish the Aboriginal Lands Trust. This was in 1966. He identified that the introduction of the bill was to be proclaimed as an act of South Australian Parliament takes a significant step, and I'm just quoting him here, takes a significant step in the treatment of Aboriginal people, not only in this state, but in Australia. So South Australia is often known as its leadership in terms of looking at driving and being the first in a whole range of movements in Aboriginal advancement in Australia. So they recognised at the time, and it was also a conversation with the late Charlie Perkins, that if this was going to be passed in South Australia, then it would have an effect on a national level. Don Dunstan further went on and acknowledged that the Aboriginal people of this country are the only ones comparable who have been given no specific rights in their own land. The Aboriginal people in this state, as elsewhere, have had certain areas of land reserved for them, but it was only Crown land, and it was not land that was owned by the Aboriginal people, and land from which they could be removed. So he went on to further say that it was not surprising that Aboriginal people everywhere in this country had been bitter that they have had their country taken away from them and had been given no compensatory rights to land in this area. So he claimed that he intended to trace the history of Aboriginal land rights in South Australia because on examination it was clear that he felt that Aboriginal people were wrongfully deprived of their lands. He said, "We must right the wrongs of our forefathers." So in the submission, he acknowledged the letters patent, which was a very important founding document for the state of South Australia, which was introduced in 1836, that had contained provisions to continue to allow Aboriginal people to enjoy the accurate occupation and enjoyment of the lands that natives of South Australia had access to prior to settlement of the establishment of the province. So two main descriptors there, the history of the Aboriginal Lands Trust, the connection of people to country. The Aboriginal Lands Trust has been at the centre, 1966, of continuing to put up a strong argument and continue to challenge, to support the rights of Aboriginal people to have access to country. And, you know, we have a very strong land rights legislation here in South Australia. And that's also supported by the fact that the Aboriginal Lands Trust Bill in 1966 gave rise to the APY Act and the Marralinga-Jarrature Act. Today we own 500,000 square kilometres of the state. We've got a number of properties right throughout South Australia, and in November last year we had a new bill that was introduced into Parliament that has given us the opportunity to look at focusing on increasing our economic mandate. And whilst we're looking at driving an economic agenda, we also have a responsibility to ensure that we continue to maintain the cultural, spiritual well-being of Aboriginal people in South Australia. So trying to find that balance is a bit of a challenge for us without really commercialising the estate. However, we've got a number of properties that we have got a lot of opportunity to look at the commercial scope on. Our Minister Hunter, it was the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs at the time, had recognised that the 2013 legislation was needed because after 46 years of operation, there were a whole range of things that were challenging the Aboriginal Lands Trust in the way in which we deal with land matters. So we've now got some very clear objects. You know, we're engaged with a whole range of stakeholders, of partners. We've got a very vibrant Aboriginal Learning on Country land management program still. We're supporting communities. The journey has been quite unique. We also acknowledge that we support an extraordinary and complex system of land management, and we are committed to collectively working towards the betterment of Aboriginal people in South Australia, as well as the general South Australian South Australian community. We've been at the forefront of fundamental change. We're still embracing significant change and challenges, particularly with the introduction of new farming practices and new land management practices. But you know, we've been open to a whole lot of those suggestions, and the challenge for us is then contextualising that and putting the cultural lens across the way in which we do our business, and still get the end result, which is about, you know, making sure that at the end of the day all of our stakeholders are engaged, those relationships are nurtured, and we're able to, as a statutory body, give an account to the Parliament who established us in 1966. It's great to be here. Some of my staff are around the place. Chris Rains will be presenting on a new model that we've got in terms of contract management, and we're open to have conversations with all of our stakeholders. So thank you very much, and in particular to the Landcare South Australia. Thank you very much. We are very supportive of the Landcare movement here in South Australia, and there's one thing I can just leave you with to take away. Like I said before at the start, always remember that at the end of the day it doesn't matter what happens, the people will still remain connected to land, to the country, and that goes as far as everybody in this room. We all got a common issue that, that connects us as people. Thank you.